First of all, is there anybody here who wants to speak on an item that's not on our agenda? There being no one, we'll move on to the next item. Mr. Samario.
Okay, thank you, committee members. Bob Samario, Finance Director. So we are going to try to essentially wrap up the discussion of the 2015 recommended budget with the Finance Committee. We have two items today we're going to cover. One is a presentation from Browning Allen, Transportation Manager, on SBCAG funding that was requested by Committee Member Hart. And then the second item we'll be presenting to you are some staff recommended adjustments, and I'll explain what those are in a moment. But we'll start with the presentation from Mr. Browning Allen, and then we'll get on the adjustments.
Great, thank you. Mr. Allen.
Thank you. Browning Allen, Transportation Manager in the Public Works Department. So I'm going to just briefly go over basically SBCAG 101 in terms of funding and how we get money from SBCAG to do various projects within the Public Works Department. So SBCAG is the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments. It's the Metropolitan Planning Organization. They also serve as the local transportation authority as well as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. That is all established by state and federal law. So they are responsible for programming and the identification of all funding that local agencies receive, whether it be grants directly from the federal or state or money that comes directly from SBCAG. So as part of that, SBCAG is responsible for preparing the Federal Transportation Improvement Plan, or the FTIP as we call it. And that is the only document that the federal government, as well as Caltrans, uses to identify any funding that we may have. So if we get a grant, such as the Highway Safety Improvement Program or the Highway Bridge Replacement Program, it must be incorporated in the FTIP. In order for us to move forward with a project, it has to be in the current FTIP. So if it's not, for a good example, if a project has been delayed, a bridge project, for example, because the federal government may be moving money around, they may take it out of the FTIP, so SBCAG board will have to amend the FTIP to put it back in before we can move forward with the construction of a project. So the FTIP is a very important document that we must rely on. Some of the primary sources of money that we get directly from SBCAG is the local Measure A, it's the half-cent sales tax, the Transportation Development Act funds, local surface transportation program, and various grants. I'm sure the committee is well aware of the Measure A. It was passed by the voters in 2008. We required two-thirds approval. We had 79% voter approval countywide. It was a continuation of the old Measure D that expired in March of 2010, half-cent sales tax. When we put the plan together back in 2008, we estimated we would raise $1 billion with a B over 30 years. With the recession, we're probably not going to hit that, but monies are coming in a little bit better than we anticipated in this current fiscal year and projected for next fiscal year. We did receive our first payment beginning in April of 2010, and it's going to go on until April, or actually March 31st of 2040. So this is kind of an overview of how the money is identified for the program. So 13.4% is taken off the top for the 101 HOV lane project, the widening project between the city limits and the county line down south. And then the balance of the money is split 50-50 between the North County and the South County. And both the North County and South County, we each have our own separate investment plans or expenditure plans. And so the money that we get directly from SBCAG comes out of the South County pot. So this is just a quick slide just to show how the revenue has been coming in since we started receiving the Measure A revenue. We started at $2.76 million for FY11, and it's been gradually going up as the economy has started getting better. And you'll see a direct correlation with the adjustment in the city sales tax money that we receive, seeing that this is a half percent of the sales tax. FY14 and FY15, those are only estimates right now because we have not closed out the current fiscal year. And the FY15 number is the number that we have been given from SBCAG staff of what we anticipate to receive next fiscal year. But obviously, if the economy continues to grow strong, we'll probably exceed that $3.376 million. We primarily use the Measure A money for a capital improvement program, pavement maintenance, Roughly $700,000 goes in towards pavement maintenance. Of the Measure A money, we also put other monies into it from city resources. On the bottom, you'll see the access ramps and sidewalk maintenance. We include that as part of our alternative modes, so it's not reflected in this number here. Maintenance and operation, this is just a part of our operating budget. So we have roadway maintenance, our storm drain maintenance, and engineering services. So this is paying for staff and material for them to do our daily work, whether it be sidewalk repair, pothole replacement, cleaning out storm drains, replacing storm drains that may have damage, as well as engineering, doing some design work and inspection work for their capital projects. In the area of alternative transportation, under the Measure A program, we are required to commit 10% of our annual allocation towards alternative transportation, and we far exceed that. We have a contract with Easy Lift for paratransit service, as well as the electric shuttle with MTD. And then we also have our annual sidewalk replacement program and access ramps program, as well as other sidewalk work that we do in-house with our staff. Another important thing to know about with the Measure A program is we are required to do what's called a maintenance of effort. So every year we must meet a certain threshold in terms of unrestricted money. So basically our UUT and other money that doesn't have restrictions, such as state gas tax, can only be used for a specific purpose. And that's based on the streets report that we submitted in 2008. This is called the State's Controller Report. We call it a streets report. And we made some adjustments to it. In fact, I worked on the committee with the Citizens Oversight Committee and some of my colleagues from other agencies to make some adjustments, because the state report that we submitted in 2008 was at the height of the economy, and shortly thereafter it started going down, and we would have had a MOE that would start close to $8 million, so we made some adjustments. And one of the things that we did was make it a 5-year average, so we averaged that over 5 years. So if in any given year you don't meet it, it's okay, but by the end of the 5th year, you must have, on average, have met your MOE. If we don't, whatever we miss it by will be deducted from our next allocation, and that's gone in it forever. Then it gets reset. So at the end of the fiscal year 15, we'll start a new 5-year cycle. So through the end of fiscal year 13, we were at 106%. We won't know how we're doing for FY14 until we submit our state controller's report, and SBCAG sends their auditor in to do the audit. But right now we're in pretty good shape to meet our MOE. As we move into the next 5-year cycle, it's going to get a little more difficult because it continues to go up, and our UUT is not growing as fast as our sales tax revenues are growing. So it's something we're going to have to pay close attention to. The other area of funding that we get is our Transportation Development Act funds. That is sales tax that's on gasoline that comes in to the county. MTD in the South County gets the majority of the money for transit. This is a portion of that's been set aside by state law that can only be used for bicycle and pedestrian programs. So we put this into our capital program. We primarily have been using this as matching funds for grants that we have received, and this is given to us by formula. So this has been a pretty reliable source of funding and has been very good for us in terms of being able to come up with the matching funds for the grants that we've been able to receive in prior years. And the other program money that we get is called the Local Surface Transportation Program, or LSTP. This is federal gas tax money that comes to the state of California, and what SBCAG does, they do a swap with the state to get state monies and to give to the MPOs, or the COGs, and then we receive this money, and this comes to, again, as via a formula based on population. And we have been putting this money into our road rehab program, since I've been here for a number of years. So it's a reliable source of funding that we receive. It does augment the UUT and Measure A monies that we put in the road rehab as well. And then recently, yeah.
Browning.
Yes.
So the money you were just talking about, this LSTP, that's all federal funds?
It started as federal money, but it's get exchanged at the state level for state money. So it's now state money, so it's not federalized money, so we don't have to go through the federal environmental review process, but it's It started as federal, but it's now state money. It's a wash.
So what does the state do with the exchanged funds?
They just use it for other capital projects within the state.
Okay.
This makes it easier for local agencies, and we don't have to deal with the federal regulations.
Okay, thanks.
And then with the renewal of the Measure A, in the South County, there was a pedestrian and bicycle program, $13 million over the 30 years for peds and bikes, and another $13 million for safe routes. It's a competitive grant program. We submitted applications for grants. In cycle one, we got $238,000 for pedestrian bicycles and another $220,000 for a safe route to school program. And then in cycle two, which we submitted last year, we received additional money for some ped bike and safe route to school programs. And we're just about wrapping up the cycle one projects. In fact, we'll be coming to council shortly for award of a couple of those grants real soon, and the other ones we already completed. And cycle two, engineering is in the middle of designing those, and one of them they're actually going to be coming to council shortly too with award of the contracts. We're at the tail end of making our commitment for the cycle one, and we're kind of ahead of the game on cycle two. Other grants that may come into the city are typically we've applied directly to the federal or state government, whether it be the Active Transportation Program, which we submitted 5 applications recently. It's the old State Safe Route to School program and the old Bicycle Transportation Account program. The governor's office took all the old state grants and put them all into one pot of money. They're calling it now the Active Transportation Program, as well as a federal transportation enhancement program was converted to a new program, and that's been all lumped into the one. So we have to compete for those monies too. So if we receive those grants, they'll also be reflected on SBK's books and as part of their FDIP amendment. And the really nice thing about having SBCAG there is they were part of the process when they were putting together the regulations on how we move forward with the ATP program, Active Transportation Program, and they were very helpful in giving us some guidance and suggestions on the program. The other thing that's important too is they know what our deadline is for spending those funds. So if we're getting close to being out of compliance, they can give us reminders and they can work with us. We have to do an FDIP amendment to get an extension for the use of those funds as well. So that's just a real quick SBCAG 101. Happy to answer questions the council might have. In past, we were able to get other grants directly from SBCAG, but with the Highway 101 or the other Measure A program projects, those monies are now committed to those projects that have been identified in the Measure A investment plan until they have been delivered. So we're looking probably around 2025, 2030 before we'll see additional monies freed up. But we know the delivery of the name project, and primarily the 101, is an important project. So,
Questions from committee members? Mr. Hart?
No question. I just want to thank Mr. Allen for that presentation. My intent kind of in asking for this was to help a little context in terms of our local dollars that we're trying to do for pavement maintenance in the context of the regional dollars and how things have changed over time. And you've heard me say this before, but I can't resist, is the real core problem for transportation finance is the gas tax, which hasn't been raised since 1994. The purchasing power at 18 cents is what is charged per gallon at the state level for the gas tax. Same thing at the federal level. Neither one of those taxes has been raised since 1994. And if you look back historically, it was pretty consistently raised. From 1923, I think, was when the first gas tax was established at 2 cents a gallon, and it was set based on the needs. So, transportation professionals would look around and say, what do we need to spend to fix roads and make infrastructure improvements? And let's set the gas tax at that level to generate those funds. And in the early 90s, that formula got stuck by politics, and it hasn't been able to be changed to increase its purchasing power. And at the same time, cars are getting better gas mileage, and so you're paying by the gallon. If cars are getting more miles on the same gallon of gas, you have less revenue from the gas tax. So essentially, the purchasing power of the gas tax today is half what it was in 1994. It was 18 cents then in terms of mileage for cars and for inflation. And today it's 9 cents. And if I don't remember our exact number that we plug into our budget from state gas tax funds, it's about $2 million a year.
$2.3 million. We saw about $350,000 drop off from the prior fiscal year in our estimated gas tax refund.
So I think that is the
FY15.
key thing. So that number should be double. If everything was the same as it was in 1994, that number for local government would be double. And then there would actually be more money, too, in the entire system for transportation. But just simply to the city of Santa Barbara, we'd have almost $2.5 million more a year, if nothing more than the gas tax was indexed to inflation and was tracking with the increasing vehicle miles traveled. So that hole that we look at in terms of maintaining our roads is a cumulative hole, too. It's not just a $2.5 million hole today. It's a $2.5 million hole, that slid up to zero over 20 years. And that is a large percentage of the problem that we have with paving our streets. In addition to that, voters have said we're frustrated by that reality, at least the voters at the local level. And so they've said, let's increase revenues by taxing ourselves through Measure A, that Mr. Allen described very well. And what's happened in that deal was that, the Highway 101 project, which had previously been promised under Measure D back in 1989, wasn't done, and the voters were kind of skeptical of the ability of the region to deliver that project. And when SBCAG went in front of the voters in 2006 with a plan to extend Measure D and actually increase it by a quarter cent, and said at the time, we really, really, really mean it. We're going to do widening the freeway this time. Voters said, no, we're not going. We don't believe it, and we don't want you to raise the tax by that quarter cent. And so Measure D renewal in 2006 barely got 54% of the vote. Didn't get to the 2/3 threshold. So 2 years later, construction of the 101 had actually begun, and the tax rate was only proposed to be raised to the existing level, and the voters thought that was a better deal and passed that by a 79%. So there's a tremendous, I think, voter mandate to do the 101 project, and the cost of that project is a significant new element in the context of local Measure D funds. It had only $15 million associated with it back in 1989. Now it's gone $140 million, and to truly deliver it requires a lot of the other funding that previously, historically, was available for local government. So that's the conundrum we're in, is that, I think the voters want the projects that they were promised under Measure A, and in order to deliver that, it's going to take a lot of the money that would normally be going to local governments. And that's particularly tough in the context of the gas tax that's fixed, and those revenues are down too. So that was my intent, in bringing this. I think you did a great job of explaining it, and I hope that helps clarify our dilemma locally.
And if you've watched any of the SBCAG board meetings the last few years, my colleagues in the other cities have also been complaining about the same situation we are in terms of not having enough money to maintain the roads, especially the county of Santa Barbara. They're really concerned about not having the money that we've traditionally had to maintain the roads. But this is a nationwide problem, not just a Santa Barbara County problem.
Sure. Questions or comments, Mr. White?
Thank you. First of all, what I don't get yet is, if we were to go back to the first sort of slide 1 or slide 2, is what's the total amount of money that's coming through annually, coming through the regional program to us? And then you mentioned, you certainly described the individual programs, but I'm still in my head, I'm not seeing what the big number is at the top of, all right, this year, SBCAG has X that they're then divvying up amongst people, and there's competition for grants, right? That's one of the pieces of the puzzle. That we might not get our population share in a given year because we're not competing for, or we don't win certain grants. But that would be one thing I'd appreciate learning. Okay, you were to respond to that. You have that up as...
Let me respond in two different ways. In terms of the grants, let me go to the grant slide first. So we did very well in both Cycle 1 and Cycle 2 for the Measure A grants. We have some project that we have identified in our 6-year CIP, Capital Improvement Program, and we submitted those applications, and we did quite well. You can see in the Cycle 2, we got over $700,000 in grant funds for both PEDs and bicycles, as well as Safe Route to School. And there were a number of the 2 cities in the county and the South County also applied for grants, and we all did quite well. We didn't get everything we wanted, but we got what we consider to be our important projects to get funded in this cycle. And what we didn't get funded this cycle we're not giving up. We'll submit it in the next cycle, and we'll make adjustments to the application to make it a bit more competitive. But there was a scoring criteria, and it's evaluated by my colleagues in the other cities, the county, as well as the school board rep, Coast rep, and Bicycle Coalition rep. So it's a very competitive process, but it's a very fair process as well. In terms of what money we actually get, I'm going to answer that this way. We have our Measure A money that we get on an annual basis, let's say $3.4 million for FY14. Then you add the local surface transportation, another $350,000. Okay, so there's $3,700,000 that we get in that can be used for anything within the roads, within the public right of way. Can be, and this money here, I'm showing the local service transportation. John Awajnik used that for maintaining the roads, and the other $69,000 of the TDA money that we get only can be used for bicycle and peds. So it's just under $4 million we get from SBK on an annual basis that we can use for infrastructure, and only $70,000 of that is restricted to bicycles and peds.
Okay, so back up to the slide that had the big number to begin with. Yeah, oh, there, right there.
Oops. There we go.
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah. All right, South County, $455 million.
Right.
So we have $7 million we're getting per year times 30 years. And then that's whatever that is. That's 210,000. 30 times 7 is $210 million. And then the other $230 million is going to 101. Is that the?
Well, there's $140 million going to the 101 off the top, and then in the South County plan, it's broken out. So MTD is a direct recipient of Measure A monies now, and that was based on the contracts they had with the city for regular transit service between the city of Santa Barbara, the city of Carpinteria, the city of Goleta, and the county. So MTD gets 26% of our share of Measure A money that goes directly to them to provide transit service.
Okay, I know we're going to run out of time.
That's
if I
fine.
just chat away.
No
on this.
worries.
We have the whole rest of the budget to do, though. So, and I'm asking questions that perhaps nobody else is particularly interested in. We do, okay. All right. Anyway, where I was kind of headed with that is, I could, if I expect that there's a spreadsheet on that $455 million that either is part of their annual budget or is part of the overall plan.
There
would
is-
show
right.
how that's all divvied up.
There's a sheet that I can share with you that shows on an annual basis how the money is broken down between the MTD, Safe Route to School, Bike Ped, Easy Left, the rail, everything.
Carp County.
Right.
Anyway, that would help me to
Right.
kind of get oriented. The dollops here and there confuse me a little bit, and it would be helpful if I could see that
Sure, I'd be happy to send that to you.
bigger picture. Yeah.
And maybe just to help, 60% of the South County money, the $455 million, goes directly to the cities in the county, in South County. And 75% of the money in North County goes directly to the cities in the county. That's per the Measure A investment plan that the voters approved when it was in front of them on the ballot.
Well, anyway, that would help me
Okay.
just to get the lay of the land, as it were. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. So, Mr. Allen, of that $455 million, you're saying 26% of that goes directly to MTD?
No, of the money that we receive, the city of Santa Barbara receives.
And how much money do we receive?
So we receive $3.7 or $3.3 million. MTD gets, we were in the $4 million range. They're getting about $1.2 million that we used to come directly to us, but we were still giving it to them. They still got it from us, but that was via contract. And that was pretty much a horse trade, if you will, without lack of better words. When we were putting the investment plan together, we had the alternative transportation group out there that wanted to make sure that transit was taken care of as well as commuter rail. So they get roughly, so when SBCAG puts their revenues together, estimates for our Measure A, they show City of Santa Barbara like $4 million, for example. And they'll show 26.06%, take it off of that to go directly to MTD, and the balance comes to the City of Santa Barbara. And the City of Goleta is a different number than the City of Carpinteria. So based on what our contract was at the time, we were putting together the investment plan. That was back in 2007, 2008.
Does the North County have a similar arrangement in terms of mass transit?
No.
The other question I had, and this came up during one of the hearings in Santa Maria on the 101 project, has the South County invested disproportionately compared to the North County in alternative transportation? Because one of the claims by some of the critics up there was that Santa Barbara was asking for money from Caltrans for things related to the 101 widening project, and we would have that money if we hadn't spent it on other things.
Well, when we put the investment plan together, and it was the board members who serve on the SBCAG board, who are members of the South Coast Subregional Committee. I think Marty Bloom was our rep at the time. Working with the community, put together an investment plan in the South County that we felt the voters were going to support. Just like in the North County, they put together an investment plan that they felt their voters were going to support. So when I send the committee the website or the page from the website that shows the investment plan, you're going to see two completely different plans. So in the North County, their commitment of the local share to alternative transportation is only 5%, versus ours is 10%. And that was because the alternative transportation advocates want to make sure there was a strong commitment in the South County, more so than the North County. And they also wanted to see commuter rail, for example, as part of our investment plan. So there's $25 million that's taken off the 43% that's going towards commuter rail, which meant all of us had to take a little bit less money to support that. So, yeah, more money is going towards alternative transportation in terms of transit. The Clean Air Express, we're all giving the same amount, north and south, for Clean Air Express. But that was what was needed to get the Measure A passed in the North County and South County.
Okay. Yes, Mr. White.
So out of that 455 South County number, is there any money that's being used in addition to go to Highway 101?
Well, we have the 140 is going towards the 101. None of the 455 is going towards the Highway 101. You could argue that the $25 million, for example, for the commuter rail will help benefit the 101 project because it's going to take some trips off of the freeway, but we're still probably years away from getting the commuter rail if we ever get that done. So none of the Measure A money is going towards the 101 other than
the 140.
But we have what was called the State Transportation Improvement Program and the Regional Surface Program money that the board has set aside to go towards the 101 freeway. But we still don't have it.
What's that? What did you just say?
So the state STIP money, the State Transportation Improvement money, it's another pot of money that SBK gets on an annual basis, another population formula money that comes directly in. That's under the control of SBCAG, and that is the money that the board has identified to help deliver the 101 freeway project. The other is this called RSTP, Regional Surface Transportation Program funds. It's another portion of, in fact, the LSTP money I was telling you about, that's the balance of that money that's flexible for the SBCAG board to use however they feel is needed. So they were looking at how can they put together a funding program that will help deliver the 101 freeway. Even with all those monies, we still do not have in our county enough money to deliver the freeway at this point in time. We're still relying on trying to get state and federal money to help deliver the freeway project. So the SBCAG board has authorized their staff to hire a lobbyist, state and federal lobbyists, to work with them to try and secure additional funding to deliver the freeway project. And I think we're, about $150 million short in terms of being able to have enough money to deliver the project, the freeway project.
Well, I just heard about a couple of more onion layers there, Mr. Chair, that I don't understand. I'd love to,
I
to
could
the
happily
extent that you can help me with those spreadsheet. You understand at least what might help me get myself oriented. So perhaps offline you could help me do that.
Be happy to do
and
that.
And then it is an interesting thought that the state might be the entity to fund a state highway. That's
A novel
that's
thought.
the obvious thing that should be happening here, and it sounds like we're having to do double backflips in order to get this done, whereas it's clearly a state responsibility.
Well, the fact that our voters approved the $140 million to go to the 101 freeway shows just how important the freeway project is to our county, and hopefully that's sending a clear message to Caltrans that this is an important project. So hopefully with that money that we've already set aside, the board has set aside, that the state will come up with the additional money that's necessary to deliver the project.
And there's more. Again, as we were discussing there, I don't know exactly how much that is from those other layers of the onion, but yet other local funds are being squeezed to go towards this, which again, it just seems, as we are starving our system, that just feels to me like it's a real loss to our local system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Allen.
You're welcome.
And thank you for our finance team for doing this in the midst of the budget work, to be pulling this together. I really appreciate it.
Onward, Mr. Samario.
Thank you. So the last item is what we call staff recommended adjustments. These are items that arise after the budget is filed in April. They're typically there's new information that comes up. A lot of them are technical adjustments, but you'll see that they're pretty innocuous. We do have one that we want to spend a little more time on, and it'll be the last item. But for the most part, these are just cleanup amounts that we want to bring to your attention. And Michael Pease, our budget manager, will go through them each. And here's a copy that you can each have, so you can see a hard copy of these adjustments, because they may be difficult to see on the screen. But Michael Pease will go through them individually.
Thank you, Mr. Samario. Chair Francisco, committee members. So just to kind of orient you to what we're looking at here, on the attachment that we handed out and also on the PowerPoint, there are 3 primary columns. Down the left side there, we describe each of the changes, and then there's 3 columns on the right. The first column shows the estimated revenue impact. The second column is the estimated impact to the expenditures or appropriations, and the last column is the net impact to the fund. And so getting right into the changes, the first change is an increase in the appropriations for the Santa Barbara Local Agency Formation Commission. We just received, after filing the budget, an updated budget from them, and so we're recommending to include that amount in the adopted budget. We felt that it was a little higher than we expected, so we did submit a request to have that reduced. But in case that doesn't happen, we'd like to recommend including it in the budget as they submitted it to us. The second change, or group of changes, is an updated revenue. Since filing the budget, we received an updated revenue estimate from the Peggy Maximus Trust. That estimate is based on the principal gift that they hold, and so the library received an updated estimate, so we'd like to include that amount in the budget and appropriate the funds. And you can see they're planning to use it for some promotional and educational programming and for their book acquisitions budget. So before I go on, maybe I'll just point out, so there's the total change for the general fund of a net impact of $10,000 for these changes. Moving along, the golf fund is the next change. As discussed at the third quarter review with City Council, the golf fund was planning to perform some irrigation infrastructure improvements that the council approved at that time. And so part of that plan was reducing their capital budget in fiscal year 15 to help replenish some of the reserves that they'd be using for that project. And so this change just takes that and includes it in the adopted budget. So it replenishes those reserves. The next change is in the solid waste fund. This is also an update to what we have in the recommended budget. At that point, when we prepared the recommended budget, we did not include the revenue or the expense or the additional expense related to the new public container fee that was discussed with Finance Committee recently. And so this just adds that into the budget, both the $145,000 in additional revenue and then the net of $135,000, since they had already planned on spending about $10,000 for public containers without the fee. The next change is in the downtown parking fund. This discusses the Lot 7 ADA improvements project. This project was actually already accomplished ahead of schedule due to some reduced costs. Really, the project, and we have staff here that can get into more detail, but basically the project was completed ahead of schedule. We originally anticipated including it in next year's budget as it's included in the recommended budget, but they were able to do the project for a lot less money by doing some restriping and just a less significant project. They were able to combine it with some other work in the garage and were able to complete the project ahead of schedule. And so they don't need the money anymore, and so they would like to use it for another ADA-related project in Lot 3.
Which lots are lots 7 and 3?
I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe Browning can comment on that.
Yeah, committee members, Lot 7 is what we call the library lot, and Lot 3 is a lot right next to the MTD Transit Center over on Chapala Street.
Okay, thank you.
So the next set of changes relate to, there are a lot of changes up there, but it's really just one change, which is an accounting change. What we're doing here is just recording the revenue received from the rental car companies directly in the fund where the expenditure is going to occur. So instead of showing a transfer from the customer facility charge fund, we actually just want to record that revenue directly in the airport operating fund, which is where the expense is being incurred. And so it's just it's a cleaner way of accounting for that transaction. The next change is in the water fund. There are actually two changes here. The first line is basically removing a $3 million expense that we included in the recommended budget that's already been appropriated by council. So this was appropriated after we filed the budget by council on April 29th. And so we're just taking this out of the budget so that we don't have a duplicate appropriation when we adopt the budget. The second change is an update that we received from the Kachuma Conservation Release Board, JPA, which is an updated budget from them. And so this is the city's contribution toward that JPA. And so we're just including that updated figure in the budget. And then our last set of changes is, I know that again, a lot of different changes, but it's really just one change. And this is an updated pension figure for some of our new employees. With the pension reform recently, we included an estimate of the cost for these new employees, new full-time employees, in the recommended budget that we developed back in the end of last year, at the end of 2013. And so we really need to update this figure to reflect what the cost would be going forward. And so this is a small number of employees, but we've discovered that this estimate really is an estimate, and we got some updated figures from CalPERS in our valuations report that we really want to update and include in the adopted budget, because this reflects what the true cost would be for those employees. And so this affects the general fund in a few areas, a total of $146,000, and then a few other funds in the various amounts you see there. So with that, unless Mr. Samari would like to add anything more, I'm happy to take questions. Okay.
So just to add, go back to that.
Okay.
The net impact to the general fund of this adjustment is $146,000. So you've seen, and we've talked about the budgeted or estimated surplus next year of about $1 million. This is going to reduce that surplus by the $146,000. We've looked at our revenues again just today because of this. We just found this out yesterday, and we figure we have to make a change. It's a big enough change for us to make. We have seen our bed tax revenues come up a little higher in the last couple of months since we come up with $1 million surplus projection. We believe, and we're going to do a little more work, we believe we can come up with some additional revenues to cover this impact. And by June 2nd, we'll come back and let you know for sure. We're also going to just make sure that the 146 is correct, because we just, again, came across this either yesterday or day before yesterday, or yesterday, actually. So we want to do a little more due diligence to make sure this is the accurate number. We believe it is, but we just want to make sure. So on June 2nd, we'll come back with a recommendation how we might tweak our revenues, if we could, to cover this impact. So in a sense, we're back to the $1 million surplus that we thought we had.
Okay. Questions from committee members? Mr. White?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Just so I understand understand a little better anyway, the pension changes. So we have the new employees that I have a different formula for the pension. These numbers reflect PERS's annual update. So this is a year's worth of changes that are being reflected here. As they do every year, they come back and say, well, all of our actuarial stuff is saying this is the number you need to crunch.
Right. So we get our information normally in October from PERS, the valuation reports, so October for the following fiscal year. Mm-hmm. They provided those reports late, but they also provide us information now that we have newer employees under PEPRA. We made an estimate initially that we built into the recommended budget. When they gave us the new reports, sort of buried within those reports were the correct numbers we should have used, and our estimates were just off. And we didn't see it. We sort of just missed it, and we missed looking at the correct number, and it was substantial. I mean, difference between, for example, 11% and 23%. We just didn't factor in what they did factor in, which is the amortization of the unfunded liability, which also is associated with every employee. That rate has to amortize the unfunded liability. So we just used an estimate. It was way too low. These are the correct numbers we should be using, and the impact is as shown on the screen.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Samario, why does this only apply to new employees?
Because when we made the estimates, we factor what, new employees are under different rules. They are required to pay half of the normal cost, and then the employer picks up the remaining portion. So when we made an estimate, we just figured, okay, what's the normal cost that the city's going to have to pay, and we factored that in. We just didn't. We sort of missed the fact that we have to still pick up the unfunded liability for all employees. The rate has to be the same across the board. So
that number had already been factored in to existing employees.
Right, but not for
Okay.
the new employees.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Samario.
So what we need to do now, we're going to, just kind of wrap this up. We would be looking for a recommendation from the Finance Committee that we would take to Council on June 2nd. And just kind of as a recap, the things that we covered are the assumptions we made for all of our tax revenues and non-departmental revenues. We talked about the proposed fees that we're proposed making for next year, along with any revenue impacts. And we've talked about these staff recommended adjustments. So we're looking for a recommendation on all of that. And I know that with respect to the Wildfire Assessment District and the slip fees, I think Mr. White wanted to recuse himself. Though if you could we can get a recommendation for everything excluding those two items that we'd forward to Council, that'd be great.
Okay. Very good. I would entertain such a motion.
I would make a motion to recommend to the council the staff's revenue estimates and fee increases and these most recent adjustments to the budget, with the exception of the wildland assessment fees and the harbor slip fees.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then I'd make a motion to recommend to the council the staff proposals for the wildland assessment fees and the harbor slip fees.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Abstain?
I abstain.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Meeting adjourned.